This is a My Math Lab question that has some language down here about xmin, xmax, and how to rescale the graph. And so I'm going to show on Desmos how to do this. First of all, the function here was f of x equals negative 5,000x plus 3,300. Now, this is not the ideal window to view this graph, and this graph looks almost vertical right now. It's not, it's just that the slope is very steeply negative at negative 5,000. So this goes down 5,000 and over 1, and because my scale only shows about 10 or 20 units right here, I really can't see anywhere close to 5,000 of them. So I could zoom out for a bit, but that's actually not going to help because when I zoom out, it zooms and scales out both the x-axis and the y-axis simultaneously. And I really just need to up the y-axis without really changing the x-axis too much. The graph settings are going to help us with that. Now, according to the options here, they're asking me which of these is the correct option. Now, I can narrow out a few of these right away because I can see that the y-intercept of my graph is 3,300. So that needs to be within the y range or I won't be able to see the y-intercept. So anything that has a y maximum that is below 3,300 for sure, like this one right here, isn't going to work. So this one's a possibility on y, this one's a possibility, and this one's a possibility. Now looking at the x's, I need some sort of x width, and here I've got negative 5 to 5, negative 0.5 to 0.5, negative 100 to 100. I can fairly certain I can rule this one out because that is so narrow on x that you can basically hardly see anything. So it's going to be B or D, and we're going to take a look at both of these to see how they look. Since the right answer is B, how about I look at D first? Okay, so in the graph settings, D had let me, oops, I was going to pull that up, pull this down for a minute. Negative 100 to 100. So in the graph settings, the x min is the smaller value for x, negative 100, and the x max is 100. The y min was negative 14,000, and I forgot the y max for that bottom one. It was 22,000. Oops, 22,000. So I can look at this one and I can see the graph at a slight diagonal, but it surely does not look like the graph we see over here because the graph over here seems to be flatter, which means that the x scale is a little more narrow than it is in this graph right here. So this one does not match up with the one that we were chosen. So we know it's not A based on this being too small. We know it's not C because that's too narrow. And we know it's not D because that graph doesn't match the picture. So we're going to tighten our x min to negative 5 to 5, and then expand that y here as well for part B. Okay. So negative 5 to 5, and this was negative 21,700, I believe, up to 28,300. Okay. All right, and I'll turn off that, and now I can see the graph. And I can compare my Desmos graph that I see on that window with the one over here in this corner, and they look similar. So this is going to be the graph that's going to get us the best view of this function as compared to this one right here. So again, these things that we see here, sometimes they're written this way. Sometimes they're written right under a graph to tell you what the scaling is. But the x min, x max, that's just the x boundary, the left-right boundary of the graphing window. Same thing, up, down, lower, and upper boundary for the graphing window. And those can be controlled over here with the graph settings. So a manual control often gives us better ability to rescale our graph than just the zoom in, zoom out buttons or the scroll wheel, which zoom both x and y axes on the same scale. So would zoom them both out at the same time rather than being able to manage the x-axis at a different scale than the y-axis.